In this video, we will show you how to replace your front brakes, pads, and rotors on this Toyota Sienna. This will be located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. We're going to have to safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, to remove the wheel, remove all 5 of your 21mm lug nuts. Now that we have the wheel off, we have a clear view of our brake caliper. We're going to have to push back our caliper pistons. To push back your caliper pistons, we can use a small pry bar and carefully make our way inside of each of these grooves in the caliper. You can see one here and one just above it. We're prying up against the caliper and the brake rotor, attempting to push back each of our 2 caliper pistons. Slow and steady wins the race here. Once you have movement from the caliper, we'll continue on with our 2 caliper slider mounting bolts. To remove the caliper slider mounting bolts, we'll be using a 14mm. We'll loosen up that upper bolt. A quick inspection, start it back in just a couple threads. At this point, we'll take hold of the caliper and fully remove our final mounting bolt. Once you've dislodged the caliper, the next thing you need to do is pay attention to each one of your caliper pistons and their corresponding dust boots. If you see any fluid making its way out of the dust boots, it means that the seals internally on the caliper are bad and you have to replace the caliper. This one looks fine. We'll set it aside. Continue on to removing your brake pads from the area. To remove your caliper bracket, you'll find that you have 2 17mm headed bolts. You know what to do. We'll fully loosen the upper one. A quick inspection, start it back in a couple threads. Let's get that lower one out of here. Remove your bracket, set it aside. Let's get the rotor off of here. There it is, friend. With that brake rotor out of the way, the next thing we'll do is pay attention to the hub mating surface here that will press directly up against the back side of the rotor. You want to make sure it's cleaned down. You can use a wire brush or even some sandpaper. Let's use some copper anti-seize on the mating surface here. Just use a glove finger to spread that around. We don't need too much. Now it's time to install that brake rotor. To hold the brake rotor in place, we'll be using one of our original lug nuts. Before we reinstall the caliper bracket, let's make sure that we clean and inspect it. To start disassembling this caliper bracket, we're going to remove the tins one by one here. As you remove them, it's a good idea to pay attention to the orientation. You can see that certain tins will have the ears facing out to one side and others will have them facing towards the other. Let's do the same to all. Remove your caliper slider pins here. Typically for these, you want to take hold of the pin itself and the boot, gently separate the two, sliding the pin out of the bracket. As you can tell, this one's pretty much stuck in place. We're going to have to work at it a little bit. This can cause a braking issue. Once you do have the slider pin out, the next thing that you need to do is clean and inspect. We're paying attention to the shafted area. If there's any miscellaneous rot or debris, it's going to cause a restriction and you're not going to have proper braking. Also, when you're cleaning, make sure you get to this point, right up closest to my fingers. That's where the boot will sit, and we want to make sure it has a good seal so no moisture or debris makes its way inside, causing an issue. Okay, I've got this pin cleaned up. A thorough inspection. We'll set it aside and repeat the process for the other slider pin. Just give this a quick wipe. There's something I want to show you. If you were to look at the two slider pins side by side, you can see one clear difference. One of them will have a vibration dampener. It's essentially a small piece of rubber. You want to make sure that when you do reinstall these, you have them in the same positioning. We removed it from this port. That's exactly where it'll go in the end. Moving from the slider pins, we'll continue on to removing the caliper slider boots from the caliper bracket so we can go ahead and clean out the ports of the bracket itself. Just have a look right along this area. I'm using a small screwdriver. You can also use a pick. We just want to carefully start pulling this out of position. Once you do have it out of there, you need to go ahead and give it a quick squeeze. Make sure it's soft and pliable, not torn, worn, or damaged. Of course, we will be cleaning out the inside. Typically, you can do this by twisting up a rag, sliding it right on through. At this point, we'll just work the boot around, trying to remove as much of the miscellaneous debris as possible. One last inspection of that boot. Repeat the process for your other caliper slider mounting boot. Once again, we're making sure that this is not torn, worn, or damaged. If it is, you want to go ahead and replace them. These look fine. We'll set them aside. Let's focus on the bracket itself. It's time to do some cleaning. We'll be starting with each of the 4 areas that we had removed those caliper tins from. To clean this, you can use a wire brush or some sandpaper. When cleaning it, you want to make sure there's no raised areas. Any miscellaneous raised areas can cause a braking issue. Just give this an inspection, repeat the process. Moving along to our caliper bracket slider ports, we'll be using some solvent, spraying directly in here. Keep in mind, as you spray in, it could potentially make its way out. Let's spray away from our faces. And a quick rinse. At this point, everything's cleaned. It's time to apply some high temperature lubricant. We'll lubricate inside of each one of the caliper slider ports. It's a good idea to have a good amount of lubricant in here. Now it's time for our caliper slider boots. When you go to install these, you're going to have to come in at an angle and start slowly pressing the rest in, working its way around. Just use a small pocket screwdriver along the inside. Give it a light tug to make sure it's completely secured. Repeat the process. We'll prepare our slider pins by lubricating them. When you do lubricate these, you want to make sure you lubricate the entire shafted area, but also make your way up into that groove that I had spoken about, closest to my glove fingers. With everything well lubricated, we'll go ahead and slide this right in. You want to make sure you have it in the proper orientation so each slider pin is in its original position. Once you do have it in, go ahead and give it a little wiggle. We're trying to work in that grease to make sure everything's properly lubricated. If you feel any restriction on these, you want to go ahead and disassemble it and re-clean it. There could be something on the inside there. I've got my slider pin that has that vibration dampener. We're making sure it goes back in the original slider port. It's extremely important to not mix this up. Just press that right in there. Push out any air. Once again, we're making sure we do have movement. Perfect. Let's lubricate our caliper bracket in all four corners where those mounting tins will sit. This will help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. Now it's time to install our mounting tins here. If you were to look closely, you're going to find that you have two that look like this and two that look like that. We want to pay attention to the areas that protrude out. You need to ensure that they're facing out and away from the rotor. If you have them facing in this direction, it's going to hit up against the rotor and you're going to have serious issues. With that said, let's take these and get them in place. Just press it right on there. As you continue, make sure each one of them is secured. You do not want them sliding around when you're braking. Let's get this over to the vehicle. Reinstall your caliper bracket. Start in each of your two caliper bracket bolts by hand. Snug them up. Torque those to 77 foot-pounds. Before we can install our brand new brake pads, it's important to pay attention to your kit. You're going to find that it came with wear indicators. You want to make sure that you install the wear indicator on the inboard pad closest towards the engine and transmission, but you want to make sure that you have that indicator tab facing towards where the rotor would be. That way there, when the pads get worn down low, it'll indicate that it's time for replacement. We'll just take this and slide it right down onto that ear, like I said, on the inboard pad. You could hear an audible click. We'll give it a little tug to make sure it's properly secured. Now we can install the brake pads onto the vehicle. When doing so, we want to make sure we have them in the proper orientation. When pressing in the brake pad, if you find that you have a hard time putting it in and you have to use a hammer of some sort, typically it means you did not clean the caliper bracket well enough. Install the outer brake pad here. Same process, we'll just slide it right in. Double check to make sure you have movement from each one of your front brake pads. To install your brake pad expander clips, we'll be making sure that we slide them into the corresponding holes on the brake pads. While doing so, it's important to make sure you're holding onto the brake pads towards the rotor there, otherwise they're going to come out of the brake caliper bracket. Now, before we install the brake caliper, let's make sure we add high temperature lubricant to the side of the caliper pistons and to the back side of each one of the ears on the caliper to help with vibration dampening. This is essentially only on the mating surfaces. Let's take that caliper, we'll carefully bring it up and over the pads, holding everything in place. Now it's time for our two caliper slider mounting bolts. We'll start each of these on by hand. Now we'll snug them up and torque them to 20 foot-pounds. Double check to make sure everything's properly secured. Let's get the lug nut off of here. One last quick inspection in this area, and we'll continue on with installing our front wheel. Start on all 5 of your 21mm lug nuts, bottom them out. We'll get the wheel safely back down on the ground and torque each of these to 76 foot-pounds. With the wheel safely on the ground, we'll be torquing these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friend, we showed you how to install one side of your front brakes. The process for one side of the vehicle is the exact same thing as the other. Once you've completed that, you want to make sure you pump up the brake pedal till it's nice and firm, and then take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.